We're going to be going over filling out those standard grids again, those answer sheets, and this time it's using decimals and fractions. This is lesson 10C. And there's going to be links in this description to help you, okay? We talked about this when we were doing fractions on the standard grid. We write in the answer up on these top boxes. We include the decimal point or the fraction bar if it's a fraction, and it gets its own column. So we'd actually write the answer up in here and use one of these for the decimal point. It gets its own column and filled in circle. So wherever the decimal point falls, when you write it in, you have to write in the decimal point. It gets its own column for the decimal point or the fraction bar, okay? And there's going to be problems on the test that will have their own answer grid. It's going to be one problem and one grid like this for one answer. This whole thing will be for one answer, okay? When doing your calculations, your answer may be a fraction or decimal depending on the method you choose. Both ways will be counted as correct. If your answer is 3 1/4, you need to write it as an improper fraction. And we learned how to do this before. We do 3 times the denominator 4 is a 12 plus the 1. So it would be like this, 3 times 4 plus 1 for the numerator, and it goes over that denominator, all right? That gives us 13/4, and that's how it has to be written in the grid. We have to write the 1, the 3, the slash, and the 4. We cannot write 3 1/4. It will be marked wrong. It's got to be written as an improper fraction on these separate grids for the answer, okay? See how the fraction bar is getting its own column, all right? And then that one's left blank. If your answer is 3 1/4, you can write it as a decimal as 3.25. We did that in video 10B, the previous video. Either way will be accepted because these are equivalent and they mean the same amount. So we could write 3.25 and the decimal gets filled in with its circle right here and its own column. See that? Just remember, mixed numbers cannot be used with these grids, and the mixed number needs to be converted to an improper fraction or a decimal. You cannot write 3 1/4 into here. It has to be converted to improper or a decimal, okay? So here's our first example. Emma, Tala, and Bob were painting their bedrooms with a 5-gallon container of paint, okay? They were sharing this 5-gallon container of paint. Emma used 1/4 of the container, Tala used 5/10 of the container, and Bob used the rest. How many gallons of paint did Bob use? How much was left for Bob? Now, we have a fraction and a decimal. So we need to either convert this problem to all fractions or all decimals. That's what I was talking about here. Depending on the method we choose, our answer is going to be a fraction or a decimal. If we choose fraction, that means we need to turn this 0.5, this 5/10, into a fraction. And we learned how to do that in our previous videos. And then we add the 1/4 to this 1/2. 0.5 is 1/2. And we multiply it by 2 to give it a 4 denominator, just like this 4's denominator. We learned that in video 7A, adding fractions. So they have the common denominator so that we can add them. If they don't have a common denominator, we can't add them. And if you don't understand that, you got ahead of yourself and you need to go back to 7A. Once they have a common denominator, we can just add straight across. 1 plus 2 is 3. We have 3/4. We know 3/4 of that 5-gallon container was used by Emma and Tala. So how much of the 5 gallons is left for Bob? Well, we learned in video 7C that we can find a fraction of an amount by multiplying. 3/4 of 5 gallons would be 3/4 times 5/1. If you're lost or confused, you need to go back, okay? When you get ahead of yourself, that's when problems start, because everything is like climbing a ladder one step at a time, all right? So we can write this 5 as a fraction by putting it over 1. Now we can just multiply straight across because multiplication doesn't need common denominators. They just multiply straight across. 3 times 5 is 15. 4 times 1 is 4. We keep it as an improper fraction. We know that Emma and Tala used 15/4 of that 5 gallons. We need to subtract this 15/4 from the 5 gallons to find out what's left for Bob. They need a common denominator to do subtraction. That was video 7a again. So we need to give this 5 a 4 denominator. Well, we know we can write it as a fraction as a 5/1, and we keep this as 15/4. And what does that 1 need to be a 4? So it has the same denominator as this one. It needs to be multiplied by 4. The numerator gets jealous. It wants to be multiplied by 4, and we have 20/4. We know this is correct because if we reduce this to its lowest terms, we'd have 5/1. See? 4 goes into 25 times. It equals a 5. So we know 20/4 is the same thing as 5 whole, or 5/1. Now, because they have the same denominator, we can do our subtraction. We have 20 minus 15. That's a 5. We have 5/4. See? The denominator slides down. So we have 5/4 gallon left to be used by Bob. We keep it as an improper fraction to enter it into the grid as the improper fraction, because remember, mixed numbers cannot be entered. We have a 5, a slash, and then the 4, and those are the circles we fill in. See? We can also convert it to 1 1/4, because that's what this simplifies as, and then to 1.25 to enter it as a decimal answer. And remember that the decimal point gets its own column, and the decimal point gets filled in, okay? Now, I cover this topic so much, I know some of you might be tired of me talking about filling in these grids, but it is just a shame if you have the right answer and it gets marked wrong because you just didn't fill this silly thing in correctly, okay? Let's try one last one. Tala has 6 375,000 yards of fabric, and she uses 2.5 yards to make a dress. How much fabric does she have left over? So we need to convert this to a fraction or this to a decimal. So let's convert this to a decimal, okay? So 2.5 converted to a decimal, we ignore the 2 because that's going to be the 2 point, all right? What needs to be converted is that fraction, half. And we learned that in the previous video, 10b, we do 1 divided by 2 because fractions are little division problems, right? And this fraction bar means divided by 1 divided by 2. We do a little division on the side. 1 divided by 2 comes out 2.5. So we know 2.5 is the same thing as 2.5. Now we can subtract because they're both decimals. Okay? That means our answer is going to be a decimal, doesn't it? So we do 6.375 minus 2.5. We can either put zeros here so they have the same number of digits, or we could just drop it down because 5 take away 0 is 5, right? So we could just drop them down. We have to regroup here. We can't have 3 and take 5 away, so we borrow 1 from the 6. He becomes a 5. That's a 13. We get 8. 5 take away 2 is 3. So we end up with 3.875 yards, and we can use that as our answer. 3.875, and the decimal point gets its own column. See? And everything gets filled in. You have to fill in these circles completely so that the machine can read them. Okay? We can also write it as an improper fraction. We know this is 3 875 thousandths. If we divide the fraction part, not the 3, if we divide this fraction part by 125 for the numerator and denominator, it'll come out to 7/8. So we'll have 3 7/8. Now we can write it as an improper fraction. 3 times 8 is 24, plus 7 is 31, and we use the 8 denominator. So we could do 31/8. And write it that way. That's considered a correct answer. It's equivalent to 3.875. See? If the decimal answer ends with a 0, you can leave it off or keep it on. Either way, it's going to be marked correct. If you come up with a 3.40, a 3 41/100ths, you can fill in as 3.4. It doesn't matter because behind here, on the decimal side, we can add as many zeros as we want and it'll be equivalent, okay? And beware of questions that ask for the answer in a certain form, like what fraction of the fabric is left. If it says what fraction of the fabric is left and you put in this, it could get marked wrong. It's asking for a fraction. It's asking for the fraction, see? Luckily, this one just said how much fabric does she have left over, so we could do decimal or fraction. But if it asks for a specific answer, what fraction, then it's got to be written as a fraction, okay? And they could catch you on that. Be careful when you're doing the test. You want to have your wits about you, okay? And look for traps and tricks, okay? So now you should be ready to do the skill focus on page 125, all right? And I hope you do well. Remember to leave any unused columns blank on this answer grid. If you didn't use that column, leave it blank, okay? If you need more help, there's going to be links in the description to all these helpful videos, all right? Even the previous ones of 10A and 10B or whatever I mentioned, okay, and the 7A and 7C, those will be in there, okay? And our next video is going to be using your calculator with fractions and decimals. It's going to be lesson 10D, and I hope I'll see you there. And I hope you do well on the skill focus. We're moving along. We're getting past 1/3 of this GED book, okay? That's where we're at now. We're past 1/3 of the way, all right? One step at a time. I'll see you next video. Bye.